Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, crisis management, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Today, we're going to talk about something we haven't touched on in quite some time on the show, business impact assessments. And I'd like to welcome to the show today someone who I talked about this with at the last year, right? Last year's BCI World in London, David Window. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Morning, Alex. Hope you're well.
Yes, morning. I know it's really early morning for
Yeah,
me.
earlier.
Still dark out.
For you, yeah.
Can you take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got into what you do?
Okay. I have a strange background. My background really is procurement. So I'm chartered in procurement. I got my Chartered Institute qualifications many, many years ago. And I worked for a water utility, and they had an international division. And in the international division, whilst I was overseas, I was in Eastern Europe. Um, they had a need for somebody to do business continuity. I'm going back now to 2003, I think, when it was publicly available specification number 56. Such a catchy title. This is pre-British Standard 25999. And somebody asked me to read the standard and then said, "You are now the expert because I don't know anybody else who's ever read that standard." And then suddenly I was it. I was the business continuity person. And then when I went back to the UK, we audited business continuity, and the audit report said we need a corporate level business continuity manager. And there I was. That was it. I was prepared overseas and then back into the UK, and I've been doing it ever since. Really, I'm a director at Continuity Shop. We're a training provider primarily. We do some work with clients outside of training as consultants, but mostly what I do now personally is training. So I teach the Business Continuity Institute CBCI courses and any of the more granular courses, including the BIA course.
And that's what we're going to touch on today.
And that's what we're going to touch on today.
So let's jump in because we're probably going to get emails after this show, and that's
Yep.
fine. But let's jump in right off the bat. Why is a BIA important?
Okay, this is something close to my heart, I suppose, because I was trained by the guy who wrote the book on BIA. So I am a protege of his. Let's give him a shout out, Mr. Ian Charters, who's now retired. I was always tutored that if you don't know what you need and you don't know what you require and you don't know when you need it, then you can't prioritize your activities. And that I see lots of debate on the internet about let's destroy the BIA, let's get rid of the BIA. I'm sure we all know where these things come from, but I haven't seen a good alternative yet to the way we do the impact analysis. And the thing with the impact analysis is I've got a strong opinion that I don't think we do it correctly anyway. So I think the BIA gets a bad reputation because not because it's a BIA and not because that's the theory, but because it's not utilized in such a way that gives you a benefit and gives you actual something that's more tangible that can be used for your plans.
Well, let's jump into that because you've said that it's not being used right. So how are we not using it, or what are we doing that we're not leveraging it correctly?
I think the first thing we do wrong is we ask the wrong question. So we start the process off by asking the wrong question, and we don't usually tell people why we're doing this analysis, and then it suddenly becomes opinionated and not analysis. So the first thing we do wrong is we say, "When do you want to recover?" And the answer is always the same:
Right away.
as, as soon as possible. Yeah, absolutely, as soon as possible. Um, and then we present them with some sort of huge spreadsheet documentation that they hate doing. They don't really understand what the end game is of doing it. And we say, okay, pick a color. red, amber, green, or high, medium, and low. Maybe we'll try scoring it like we do with risk, and then pick a timescale. And we ask them, when do you want to recover? It's always as soon as possible. And most people will pick a recovery time objective immediately based on instinct.
Mhm.
And we forget the word analysis. We don't do any analysis. We ask purely for opinion. And so many times when I say, do you actually establish the maximum tolerable period of disruption, which again is a very cumbersome uh, term, I think. I say to them, if you have to establish a tolerance, and if you establish the tolerance, then you know what you will not accept. And then I ask them, okay, in an incident, you're going to lose something, you're going to suffer some impact. What will you accept? And I don't think we push the concepts of unacceptable and acceptable strongly enough. So um, we start almost from the back and backwardly engineer it into something that the person filling it in thinks is appropriate, which leads to hugely short MTPDs, which leads to even shorter RTOs, which are just crazy and ridiculous that nobody can ever achieve.
Yeah, and then IT looks at it and go, "You must be joking."
Yeah. How much investment would you like us to put into this to come up with a solution? So we squeeze the timescale into something crazy. And I had a client a few years ago. And I said to this guy, we were doing an exercise, and I said to the guy, what shall we exercise? And who shall we exercise? And I said, why don't we exercise everybody in your organization that thinks they're coming back in less than a day? And he laughed and looked at me and he said, David, that's everybody. And I said, yeah, it's crazy. They've probably spent the whole year complaining about being under resourced. And then, as if by magic, they've said they can reach an RTO within 4 hours. 80% of the business thinks it can do that. And the other thing we don't seem to understand is that recovery time objective is not back to business as usual. So when I say to people, what does RTO look like? They say 100%. And that's just crazy. So lots of people don't use the minimum business continuity objective, which states what level of service is appropriate to get back to in that recovery time objective. So I say to them in the classes, if I put you on a train for 2 hours, but I didn't tell you the destination, how would you know you've arrived at the right place? So I need an RTO to go with an MBCO, but I need it to be established based on first knowing the MTPD. Now, just the way I said that then is a complete and utter switch off to anybody who's doing a BIA that doesn't understand business continuity. So I try to do it in plain English when I do it. What level, what over what time period and what type of impact will you tolerate? I don't use MTPD officially. And what will you accept? And what level of service do you think you could get back to in that time frame? But I try not to use the acronyms because when business continuity people use acronyms, the organization just shuts down. Everybody just shuts down and dozes off. So
Yeah.
I think we should try and stay away from the acronyms. I almost think we should try and stay away from huge spreadsheets as well.
Well, yeah, having worked with those myself, um, they can be a challenge now and then.
Yeah, yeah.
But why is it that we don't think this way with BIAs? Why do we automatically go to RTO when do you expect to be up? And knowing everyone is going to say right away, why do we continue down that path? Because no
I'd
matter
like
where
to,
you
I'd
go,
like to
anywhere,
say, I'd like to say it's because people haven't been on my course, but that would be a bit. Um, because I think what we do is we look for because we don't really see the benefit of business continuity as organizations, we don't buy into the topic, then we just want to get it off the table and get on with the day job. So the quickest way to do that is to pick a time scale. And the other question we always ask as well, which I think is completely wrong, um, but it's been substantiated by being written into standards, is are you critical? And as soon as we say, are you critical? Everybody says, yes, we are. Nobody wishes to say they're not critical because that's similar to being unimportant. So I also propose we stop asking, are you critical? And change it to what the Business Continuity Institute's guidance says. Don't use the word critical. It says in the book, this can be misconstrued. Um, when are you a priority? That's what I'm trying to establish. And then the other thing we don't do very well, because it's underplayed, I think, in the guidance, is this thing called a consolidated BIA. So what we don't do, and I know this from my experience in the classes, we don't bring all of the analysis together and then look to see if there's a disconnect between RTOs, MBCOs, and MTPDs. And we don't have that consolidated position. That is absolutely a vital piece of information, but it should be based on genuine analysis, not hundreds and hundreds of guesses.
Well, that's actually leading into the next piece. What is quantifiable? What is a quantifiable BIA? Is that what you're getting at now? Is bringing all this together
It
and saying,
is. It is. It is. And again, when I do this each week in the class, the people in the class, when I say to them, this is how I would do it, they say, that's infinitely sensible, David. Yes, fantastic. I see your point. Yes, obviously. We'll never do that, though. Why? We won't be allowed to do that. It takes too much effort. Um, and people just want to tick the box.
hmm,
So let's imagine I'm doing a BIA and you've got time slots. You've got time slots in the BIA, 1 to 4 hours, 4 to 8 hours, etc., etc. I say to people, you're all measured on something that I've coined the phrase positive operating targets. You're all measured on a positive operating target. Answer a call in a call center within 3 rings, answer so many calls per hour per day, ring back within 1 hour. They're all targeted. So I say to them, what are you not doing now that you've lost the ability that you should be doing? And then why does it matter? So if they say, well, I'm not hitting the positive operating target of calls within 3 rings, I do I've heard it's called the so what test. So I say, so I play the dumb person in the room. So what? And they say, no, it's vital. We get measured on that. Oh, really? Okay. So how do you get penalised then? We get fined by the regulator. Oh, okay. Shall we put down there is a potential fine from the regulator, and they don't want to quantify it in terms of money always. But I say, can you do it in terms of percentage? How many calls do you normally take, and how many calls are you losing? And then I go through the time slots and I make them complete every time slot. Is it getting worse, or does it stabilize, or does it peak? And
mhm.
then I ask them the question, and from all those time slots, which one would you deem to be unacceptable? And when they say 4 days or 3 days, or I say, okay, that's your tolerance. You have to accept some loss. What would you accept? And if they say 1 day of loss of target, then that's your RTO. And I just make it, I think I make it simple. But if
Mhm.
you ask somebody to do that in a BIA, and then you ask them to quantify financial, reputational, societal impacts, health and safety, environmental, that feels like a big job. My my view is if you do that big job once to a really good degree, everything going forward will work better rather than just say, I'm important, so I need to come back in 2 hours. And some people have software that actually says to them, if you can attach yourself to this description of critical, you have to pick 2 hours. And the system does it for you. And it takes the pain away, but it also takes the analysis completely away. There's no analysis.
Yeah,
The clue's in the title, business impact analysis, but we don't analyze. There's
yeah.
something, sorry, Alex, there's something happening on the internet now about quantification of risk and quantification of impact on risk, which I'm really interested in. Because if you can do it for risk, why can't you do it for BIAs? So if you can quantify risk, you should be able to quantify the impact in the BIA as well. The difference is risk is impact and likelihood, whereas the BIA will be impact and time of incident and seasonality. So I perceive of a Boston style matrix that instead of being impact and likelihood, it shows impact and time. And then you're working on the time of incident at that point. And that still fits with BIA theory.
It's interesting. You mentioned a couple of things there. One, everyone believes they're critical, even if they're dependent on every other unit in the organization,
Yeah.
we're still critical. Not everybody can. And sometimes I think a lot of people that are filling out the BIAs don't even understand what's happening in their own organizations.
No, no. And if I say to people, are you a priority? And they say yes, then I say, are you a day one priority, or are you a week one priority? Or are you a month one priority? When are you a priority? And that's the true essence of establishing a recovery time objective based on impacts over time. I'm using the exact words A, that I was taught, and B, that's in the book, the GPG. And actually, I think we've lost sight of the term impacts over time suggests to me that I need to see the impacts over a timeline, not the singularity that is when are you impacted. I want to see all of them so that I can then make a judgment. I've had people say to me, how can you possibly do a BIA without colours? It's impossible. I did get a really good pushback off a student in class once who said, but top management only want to see the coloured dashboard. And I said, okay, good pushback. I agree. Please put the colours in after you've established the analysis. So do the tolerance first, do the RTO and the MBCO, then colour code it, and then use it as a coloured dashboard. But don't, if you say you've got three choices, red, amber, green, that anything that's green will be before RTO, anything that's amber probably will be RTO, and anything that's red will be MTPD. And it's just oversimplified, and it's not what I would call analysis.
Yeah, and sometimes if you are using just three colors, red, green, red, amber, green, green could be anything from a 0 to a 50. If you're
Exactly.
1 to 100, well, that's a large swath.
Yeah.
How are you comparing a 1 to a 49?
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
big
It's
difference.
exactly as I used to say to my old boss when I was in risk. He'd say this is a 1 in 50 year event, and I'd say, well, is this year 2 or year 49? Now I know
Yeah.
that's not how statistics work, but in a business continuity mindset, that is, I need to know, is it tomorrow? I need to be prepared. It might be tomorrow.
Mhm. How do you bring IT into this? Because when hopefully you've done the proper analysis, then you've got all your information. IT has their own setup, their own disaster recovery protocols and plans they've got in place, hopefully. How do you reconcile the two?
You heard the phrase, the tail wagging the dog.
Hmm.
So again, I ask these questions in the class, and people from IT say to me, we tell the business what it can have. And I say, well, in the BIA should be you telling the business what you need. And sadly, what you find is that there's a disconnect because the IT specialists say to me, but the business won't tell me what they need. So I have to make assumptions. So it should flow from the BIA. So it's sometimes an unpopular thing to say, but IT is just a support service, I'm afraid, although it's absolutely vital. But
Hmm.
it's often perceived as running the show. Once you've told IT what you need, then when you go into professional practice 4, when you do the solutions, they should be able to say to you, but we can't afford that. That's impossible. So the other concept that's missing is everybody puts an RTO in a BIA and thinks that's the job finished.
Yeah.
It it actually even says it in the book. It's established at RTO, or set, I think is the word it uses. But then later in professional practice 4, it says this can be amended based on risk appetite, which I believe in, which is true. So, but the problem is most people go from analysis to plan, and they
Mhm.
completely miss out the consolidated position, the consolidated solution, and they don't believe that you can change an RTO from a BIA. And the thing with an RTO is the shorter the RTO, the more investment is required to hit it. And you find you can't afford it, and top management actually won't invest that much. But even the good practice guideline says top management should be allowed to ignore is not quite the right word, but amend the RTO based on their risk appetite, which is perfectly reasonable. Do they want to take more risk and more impact?
Mhm.
Fine.
Yeah, or do you want to pay another couple of million to build a new
Yeah.
system or a vendor or something?
Yeah. Let me give you a real example. without mentioning any names, I did some work in Africa a few years ago, and I was working with the CFO, and we had all the BC champions who established, which is a strong word, isn't it? Established the RTOs and the MTPDs. And we did a summary report to the CFO. And I said to the CFO, they look quite short, these tolerances and these timescales. He said, they're crazy. They're too short. Why are they so short? And I said, well, operationally, they don't want to fail. It's a different mindset than top management. And I said, they pick short timescales because they're risk averse, and it's natural, it's normal, and you get penalised in your contracts. And he said, yeah, but don't they realise that if I see penalties in a contract, I add money to the contract? He said, so basically, I give them their money back. If I don't fail, I keep more profit. He said it's already built in to the supply chain element. I've got a strong opinion about you shouldn't put penalties in a contract as well, because they're seen as punitive, and a good supplier will add contingency cost to it that you will never see or understand, and they're just giving you your money back. So penalties are really a bad way of, I was going to say enticing, but you're not enticing a supplier, you're penalising them. If you were going to ask me what would I do, I would use liquidated damages. I would be put to proof of what I've lost. It's stronger actually, because you don't know what you're going to prove. It could be bigger than the penalty, or it could be less than the penalty. But I've got off into supply chain mode now.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to jump into supply chain in our next segment. So why don't we take a break now? But first, are there any final thoughts you have on everything we talked about so far with BIA design before we jump into the BIA?
If I could change the world tomorrow, stop asking, are you critical? Stop asking, when do you want to recover? And talk to people like human beings and ask them about their operation and say, what should you be doing that you can't do? And let's record it. Then let's establish what's unacceptable and what's acceptable. And then let's make an estimate of where you think you'd 80% of normal strength for an MBCO. If you could use the parameters correctly and establish genuine analysis, which is where I think AI might come in, which I think we're going to talk about at some point. Then I think that's where we can make this thing better, rather than throw the BIA away. I think we should just be able to make it better.
Great. On that note, we've come to the first, excuse me, the end of our first segment. We are talking with David Window today about BIAs, and we will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.